Okay, welcome back, brothers and sisters in Islam. Today, I would like to discuss with you my personal opinion on the subject of the 12 caliphs in Islam. But before we discuss with you this lecture, for those of you that are just coming here for the first time, would you please consider to subscribe this channel and view and make comments on the ideas that we are passing on, the message that we are passing through this channel, so that we will see the impact of what our message is creating out there, so that where we take corrections, we make corrections, and where we will thank God that we are impacting knowledge, we will praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make us use us to impact knowledge of the truth to the ummah. May Allah not use us to impact knowledge of falsehood to the ummah of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. My opinion on the subject of the 12 caliphs in Islam is very clear. Before I come to this, in my previous lectures on this same subject, I want to use a summary of my previous lectures to provide a methodology, the method I used to come up with my own conclusion regarding the 12 caliphs in Islam. First of all, in my opinion, based on the ahadith of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, my first methodology is the hadith of Sakalain. The hadith where the Prophet alayhi salatu, that hadith is Sunan Abu Dawud and together with Sunan Tirmizi. Hadith of Sakalain, where the Prophet said, Inni taraktu lakumus Sakalain, I have left behind for you two things. If you hold on to them, you will never go astray. First of all, the Quran, which is the rope of Allah. And this is a rope that will never cut, except if you leave that rope. Secondly, my family. That's what the Prophet said. That is the family of the Prophet. So my first methodology in coming to the conclusion regarding the identity of the 12 caliphs in Islam is that they must be from the family of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This is not a Shiite approach of subject. No, this is from a Sunni approach, because there is no, and the Prophet said his family and the Quran are two inseparable entities till the day of judgment. So the family that will remain most loyal and attached to the Holy Quran till the day of judgment is the family of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasallam. So nobody, no any other person from any family can attain any spiritual status above that of this family. And so I want to, and this family is also from Quraysh. So I want to limit my research to the family of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This is one. Number two, is it every family of the Prophet that we just consider to be a Khalifa? No. The Quran now comes in now. Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 33. Chapter 33, verse 33 of Surah Al-Ahzab, where Allah is saying, Innama yuridullah liyuzhiba ankum rijza ahlal bayt wa yutahhirakum tathira. That is, whether this person is from the family of the Prophet or yes. Secondly, he must have attained perfection, spiritual perfection, purity, devoid of every form of blameworthiness or iniquity from him. He has to be somebody that is well known with spiritual perfection, whether he's politically powerful or not, but he must be someone who has attained the highest level of spiritual purification. That's my second methodology. Thirdly, الَّذِينَ يُحْيُونَ مَا أَمَاتَ النَّاسُ مِنْ سُنَّتِي. He has to be among those that will revive the sunnah of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam in that era that people has forgotten the sunnah. So he is now a stranger in that era, but his stranger now is now reviving, bringing back the sunnah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ in that era. Now that's number 3. Number 4, the Prophet said his ummah is going to follow him. So he has to be somebody that is recognized in this ummah. The ummah of Nabi Muhammad must recognize him. He cannot be someone who is unknown in history. No, he has to be someone, whether you like him or maybe you will like him or we hate him, but we know that his name is still dazzling in the pages of history. When you hear such a name, you know that yes, that was a gigantic star in the history of Islam. He has to be somebody like that. Number 4, he has to be unique in a whole century. A whole 100 years, he has to be the one that is most recognized in that 100 years. Because of the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, Kitab Ru'ya, where the Prophet said, after every 100 years, Allah will raise a man to revive his sunnah to this ummah. So, based on this methodology, we will now browse the pages of history. Based on my research, I don't know all, and I'm not saying I am 100% correct, but I want you to also go into research and use these methodologies so that you will be able to come up with some other candidates that are better than mine. But these are my candidates, and Gaibu Sayyidillah. If I'm correct, praise be to Allah. Whether I'm wrong, then this is just a wake-up call for the Muslim Ummah to go into research in this subject so that we'll browse every pages of history, every 100 years in the history of Islam after the first 300 years of Hijrah. And why am I subtracting the first 300 years of Hijrah? Because the first 100 years was the age of the Prophet himself. There cannot be a Mujaddad. These 12 caliphs cannot emerge in the age of the Prophet, and that is why the Sahabas, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, and Ali, these were people who were carrying on the prophetic message to the next generation. So they are not even among these 12 caliphs that we are talking about here. They were people who maintained the legacy of the Prophet and they passed it on to the next generation, to the Tabi'ins. So Tabi'ins being honored by seeing the Sahabas, that age, the Prophet praised that age. Summallazi talinun. Summallazi talinun. That is the age that comes after my age. That is Khairul Qurun. Khairul Qurun allazi amshi fihi. That is the best of all ages. Is the one I spent my life in it. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Summallazi talinuna. And then the age that followed this one, that is the prophetic age. Summallazi talinuna. And then the one that follows this second one, that is the first 300 years of the history of this ummah. These 12 caliphs are not going to emerge. But according to the Shiites, they have exhausted in these 300 years. And then the Mahdi is in occultation. This occultation of a thing is another subject I want to, by the grace of God, in our subsequent lectures, I want to deliver a lecture in this subject of occultation in Islam, because totally I disagree with it. I don't believe in this idea of occultation, that the Mahdi has been in the gaib, in the occultation for the past 1,100 years, and then in the end of days, he is going to emerge. I don't believe in such things. And why did I refuse to believe in that? Because the Prophet said, this ummah, majority of the people of this ummah will only live long, will live for just 60, ma bayna sittuna wa sab'un. The age limit of this ummah is just within 60 and 70. Only few will live more than 60 and 70 years. If the Mahdi is from this ummah, then he should be someone who will live within just 60 and 70 years, and or even if he lives above that, he should be very old. So there's no way the Mahdi can be in occultation for 1,100 and something, and then he will emerge in the end of days. That's not even possible. But anyway, that's not our subject of discussion for now. By the grace of God, in our subsequent lectures, we will release a lecture on the occultation, on the subject of occultation in Islam. If there are such things in Islam, we will discuss it. So, If you now look at the pages of history, subtracting the first 300 years of the Islamic history after Hijrah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, we are now in the 400 years. We experience the emergence of a new caliphate, that is the Fatimites Caliphate, that is the children of Fatimat az-Zahra bint Rasulullah ﷺ. Within these first 300 years of the Islamic calendar, from the incidents of Karbala, that is the incidents of martyrdom of Sayyidina Hussein alayhi salam, the family of the Prophet has been in what is known as, have been facing what is known as oppression, internal oppression from the Muslim Ummah. That's a reality. That's a fact we cannot deny. This is not a sheer idea. No, this is historical fact. The family of the Prophet was in what is known as internal oppression. Within the Muslim Ummah, they were not given the honor that they deserved. The Abbasid Caliphate, coupled together with the Banu Umayyah Caliphate, they really suppressed the Ahl al-Bayt with the highest level of suppression within the Muslim Ummah. But after 300 years after Hijrah, the world experienced the emergence of a Ahl al-Bayt, the emergence of a caliphate from the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. And that caliphate is a caliphate whose traces can be found up to today. The Muslim Ummah still benefits from the contributions of that caliphate. That was the Fatimites Caliphate. And the founder of that caliphate is Abu Ubaidullah Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Mahdi Billah. He was a descendant of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and he migrated from Syria to Morocco and was able to establish that caliphate. And for the first time in the history of this ummah, the family of the Prophet was established on earth. And based on my opinion, after this lecture, by the grace of God, I'm going to come up with subsequent lectures that will dissect the biography of this man and why I chose him to be the first caliph out of these 12 prophesied by Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And within that first 400 years, that is that 100 years between the 3rd and the 4th century of this ummah, there was no any other significant event that was so astonished, that was so dazzling in the pages of that history. The whole of this ummah praised that Fatimite dynasty, and that dynasty grew within that century. They conquered Mecca and Medina. They took control of even Palestine, and they launched an attack to Constantinople, which was also prophesied by the Prophet. So a lot of prophecies were fulfilled with the emergence of the Fatimite Caliphate. That is why I choose this man, Muhammad ibn Muhammad Abu Ubaidullah al-Mahdi Billah, to be the first Mujaddid in the Islamic dynasty, in the Islamic world. And he was questioned, are you the Mahdi? Because you call yourself al-Mahdi Billah. He said, no, he is not Imam al-Mahdi, but Imam al-Mahdi will be from his descendants. And if you look at it that way, there is a famous hadith where the Prophet said, in the end of days, a sun will rise from the west. Morocco is known as Maghrib, which is the west. And that sun will eventually set in the east, which is Mecca and Medina. If this man is the man, is that sun's rise of the west, because a caliphate, sun could signify a caliphate, it could mean a leader or a khalifa. A khalifa will rise in the west, and that caliphate will eventually set in the east, which will move its capital to the east, which is Mecca and Medina. If this man, Abu Ubaidullah, is that sunrise in the west, and he declared that the Mahdi is coming from his descendant, then definitely the Mahdi will be the sunset that will set in the east, and that will be the fulfillment of this hadith. And this hadith is one of the 10 major events of Akhir Zaman. the sun will rise from the west and it will set in the east. This is a hadith that has to be interpreted. It's not a hadith that you interpret literally. You say this sun will rise from the west and it will set in the east. I disagree with that. And in my subsequent lectures, I will give reasons why I disagree with that. After that age, if that age passes, that's the first, that is the 100 years after the 300, the 400 years after that, in the 500 years, the 6th century of Islam, there was no any figure in the Islamic world who was as prominent as Abu Hamid, Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali, who is known as Imam al-Ghazali. Based on my researches, Gaibu lillah, we don't know what is unseen, but up till date, that name al-Ghazali is a name that will never ever be forgotten in the history of Islam. After that century, if you go to the next century, who was that figure that the Islamic world will never forget? These are grand caliphs, spiritual caliphs, and some of them are political caliphs while some are spiritual caliphs. Not all of them are necessarily political leaders, but all of them must have this spiritual leader, and all of them must have attained this spiritual purity that has no equal in their time. The 3rd century after that is the time of Abdul Qadir Jilani wa Kailani rahimahullah, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani wa Kailani. Up till today, Gawsullah al-Azam, this is one of the most prominent figure in the Islamic world. None can match with them. Nobody can compare themselves with them. After this era of Abdul Qadir Jilani wa Kailani, the next century, the most prominent figure in that century was, based on my opinion, based on my researches, Allah knows best. But if you have a better candidate, you should be able to produce them. I must have to give subsequent lectures that would dissect into the biography of all these people I mentioned to justify my position, to come up with them as my candidates of the Mujaddids in the history of Islam. After this time of Abdul Qadir Jilani wa Kailani, after that century, in the 8th century, the world of Islam witnessed the emergence of Imam ibn Ali, Sheikh Muhammad al-Shazali, Imam al-Shazali. That is the Kutub of the Shazali Tariqa. He was another prominent figure, a descendant of the Holy Prophet, who was known to be showing a lot of karama, spiritual gifts Allah bestowed on him. And throughout that era, nobody, even Ibn Arabi al-Khatimi, who was another prominent figure in that era, he followed him. Ibn Arabi praised him. Ibn Taymiyyah also praised him. Salahuddin, who is one of the greatest sultans in the history of Islam, was a follower of this Imam al-Shazali, which makes him to be a very prominent figure in the history of Islam. After that time, the world witnessed the emergence of Bahauddin Naqshbandiya. After that era, according to me, my research, this Bahauddin Naqshbandiya is the spiritual pole of the Naqshbandiya Sufi order. He is the 5th Mujaddid, the 5th Caliph prophesied by Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And before his death, he made a declaration that it was time for the Muslim Ummah, for the Muslim political power to expand and to extend its tentacles on earth. And after his death, after he made this declaration, he died. And after his death, the world now witnessed the emergence of the Ottoman Caliph, Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, who is known as the Ottoman Conqueror. The Ottoman Conqueror, of which the Prophet ﷺ praised him and the Prophet praised his army. The Prophet said, ﷺ, La tuftahanna al-Qustantiniya, falani'mal amirun amiruha, walani'mal jaysh, zalika al-jaysh. That is, you must certainly conquer Constantinople. He's going to be a wonderful Amir, and the army that will fight beside him is going to be a wonderful army. This is Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih.